Yes, I do watch Zully. I just saw the video and I wanted to expand on it. No, I'm not copying them. If you say that one more time, I swear to God, I will curb stomp. Recently, Elden Ring has been nominated in multiple categories in the Game of the Year awards. One of them, which seems to have garnered some backlash, was its nomination for Best Narrative. After watching Zully's video on the subject, I wanted to give my own take on it and touch on a few things that I believe are being misunderstood and kind of glossed over. Now, I'll go into a long rant about what narrative and story is and how people might be confusing the two and some other very nerdy shit about study of narratives. If you want to skip all that boring shit that grounds my arguments to studies, skip to the time shown on screen. Right, let's fucking begin. Let's start with what a narrative is. Depending on who you ask and basically where you are, you'll hear a description that is very similar to the word story, as if like the two are the same and can be used interchangeably. But narrative is a method, I would say, rather than content. Like, looking at it from a literary perspective, a story is the series of events that happened, is happening, and will happen, in the world that you're playing in. So, for example, the shattering, that is actually a part of the story. But a narrative is how this story is reflected to the player. So a game developer might choose to hide that part of the shattering from the player in different ways, and, for example, omit important details as well as to who began this whole thing. If it was Ronnie or if it was America herself, etc. This is kind of ambiguous, and the narrative chose to make that ambiguous, but it doesn't change the fact that someone did start that. So, a narrative can choose to omit things and add things, or maybe rearrange things however the creative mind behind it might choose to do. So when people think about the kind of narrative that Elden Ring had, they might feel like it didn't have much of an impact, or that they don't remember much because it was mostly hidden away. But behind difficult challenges, like this fucking guy, and just cryptic quests. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the narrative was bad, rather it was different, and I'd argue more game-like. Narratives that require more participation from the reader have been around for ages, basically, where the story might be more obscure for the purposes of, prompting readers to interpret and join in the process of figuring out the story. So we see people like this guy, he's French, I don't know, I can't read his name. So we see people like him that describe this dichotomy of, narratives that hide such things, or narratives that allow or maybe require reader participation to be writerly, and narratives that kind of present and show everything as readerly. And he has a bias towards writerly narratives, but I won't really get into that much. And he isn't really the only one. We see similar descriptions all throughout history. We see Echo talk about open and closed narratives. That kind of talks to a similar idea, but not necessarily the same. I won't claim that. I'm just glossing over a lot of things right now. Bear with me. There's also Wolfgang Iser, who talks about indeterminate narratives, which, have gaps in them that the reader should fill in through interpretation. Sounds familiar, right? And we also have people talk about ergodic literature and cybertexts, which basically, to tone it down, it's to get to the story, to get to the truth, in quotation marks, of what happens. The reader would need to overcome the challenges that are set by the narrative itself, and this might just be, a difficult poem or a boss. I mean, we've had narratives that try to obscure things and try to make the reader work and try to make the player work, alongside of more traditional narratives that are being adopted into the video game media, like God of War or Horizon Zero Dawn. We've had both of those types of narratives for quite a long time, so when people say, or when people dismiss Elden Ring's narrative as being non-existent or maybe just outright bad, it's not as new as you might think it is. It has roots that go way back. So the format that Elden Ring has been adopting of omitting details and making everything convoluted and maybe open to interpretation is not new. I mean, there are novels that people studied that have similar attributes, like a mystery novel where the mystery is never revealed. When it comes to video games, I'm sure we've all seen games where you're just pelted with cutscenes after just playing the game for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And while that can be fun, because who doesn't love movies, this quality, I feel like, kind of ignores the one thing that video games can use to distinguish themselves from other media: player agency. I just play a level and then I get exposition dumped on me in the form of a cutscene that just shows me what I missed or just shows me what happened. God of War follows a similar format, with having the story reflected through dialogue, various flashbacks and just stories about the past, and a lot of cutscenes, which can be fun to watch, and of course it is fun to watch, but it doesn't mean that it's the correct way to tell a story, just because it tells you the story. What Elden Ring and other Souls-like games do best is that they use what is available in the video game medium to hide the story within the world and allow the players to discover the story by themselves. And this really aids in the idea that you're creating your own story in these games as well. As you play through the game and as you explore at your own pace, you explore things that have happened or will happen at your own pace, and the discoveries are yours. You discovered them in your journey. You didn't live through another one's journey. So open world games in the first place have the luxury of allowing the player to create their own stories for themselves, because you might explore Caelid the first as your basically second zone, while I might just avoid it until I'm overpowered. And on top of that, what Elden Ring allows is that because it hides the stories and the important elements behind either difficult bosses or item descriptions or just basically detective work, the exposition that is dumped on me in more classical or straightforward narratives is left to me. I have to make those decisions and I have to connect them. So the game continues even when there should in quotation marks, a cutscene. So since physical interactivity is the most obvious difference between video games and movies, maybe we can argue that Elden Ring's approach makes the most use out of what a video game is by just requiring more participation. I mean, it wouldn't even be difficult to argue that Elden Ring's narrative celebrates what makes a video game: the player, since the storytelling isn't exactly telling, but rather allowing the player to build by themselves, just as a video game should. Thanks for watching. I hope it wasn't too boring. If you've stuck around until now, I'm first of all amazed, and second, I apologize because I have a variety of things that I do, and none of them seems to be too consistent. I guess I'm still trying to find the type of things that I do or I enjoy doing. And this was kind of a new thing that I wanted to try. So if you've enjoyed it, thanks for watching, and thanks for sticking around this long. And yeah, see ya.